Let that arrogant jerk sink. It is not like he ever paid us what we were worth anyway, someone muttered under their breath, while our wealthy employer was flailing helpless and terrified in the deep end of the marble swimming pool. Yes, you heard that right. While a young man in a wheelchair fought desperately for his very breath in the cold water. Employees who had served his family for over a decade stood completely paralyzed on the stone patio, staring with a chilling mixture of fear, resentment, and cold indifference. Not a single person moved a muscle. Not a single soul stepped forward to help, except for me, the new maid who had barely been working in that imposing southern mansion for 2 full weeks. That single split-second decision to throw myself into the water changed the entire trajectory of my life in ways I could never have envisioned in my wildest dreams. My name is Daisy Miller. I am 22 years old, and I came from a quiet, dusty mountain town in western North Carolina called Bryson City, arriving in the grand city of Atlanta with nothing more than a worn canvas backpack filled with humble dreams and a heart overflowing with hope. What I could not possibly have known on that warm autumn morning was that my impulsive act of courage would tie my fate to a family secret so deep, nobody would ever believe it if I wrote it in a book. "Lord in heaven, Mr. Vance is drowning," screamed Hannah, the head cook, wringing her apron in her trembling hands, yet refusing to take even a single step closer to the water's edge. The body of Ethan Vance was thrashing violently in the crystal-clear pool water, his dark hair plastered against his forehead as sheer terror consumed his features. He was only 27 years old, but life had already dealt him a catastrophic blow 5 years prior that left his legs completely motionless, and now he was sinking like a stone. His state-of-the-art motorized wheelchair lay overturned on its side near the polished limestone rim, one rubber wheel still spinning slowly in the humid air like a silent witness to the sudden tragedy. "Somebody do something and call an ambulance!" shouted Arthur, the head gardener, frantically pulling out his cell phone. Yet his fingers shook so violently that he dropped the device twice on the wet tiles, his eyes wide with utter panic. Out of the 6 longtime staff members standing in the manicured garden that morning, an eerie stillness took hold. Bradley, the personal chauffeur of 15 years, deliberately took 2 steps backward into the shade of the weeping willow, while Clara, the stern housekeeper who ran the estate with an iron fist, stood as rigid as a statue, her mouth agape in silent disbelief. "Get out of my way," I screamed with a voice so sharp and desperate I barely recognized it as my own, forcefully shoving past Arthur and Hannah, who were blocking the poolside path. My legs moved purely on adrenaline and instinct, paying zero mind to the terrifying consequences without even stopping to kick off my canvas shoes or unbutton the heavy blue maid apron I had been handed just 14 days ago. I hurled myself into the water with a loud, splashing impact that sent shock waves through the quiet courtyard, the cold pool water instantly rushing up my nose and filling my ears as I fought against the weight of my soaked clothes. In my small hometown, I had only ever waded through ankle-deep creek beds, and I had never in my life attempted to swim in water 9 feet deep. But the image of a dying man pulled me forward through sheer force of will. "Grab my arm, Mr. Vance," I choked out as I finally reached him, my hands frantically searching through the turbulent water until my fingers locked onto the fabric of his soaked designer dress shirt. Ethan was barely moving now, his normally cold and guarded hazel eyes wide with raw, primal panic as water filled his lungs, sinking deeper into the shadowy depths of the pool. "Don't you dare give up on me." I sobbed into the water, wrapping my right arm securely under his collarbone and kicking my legs with every ounce of muscle I possessed in an agonizing effort to keep his head above the surface. He was surprisingly heavy, his broad shoulders and dense frame weighing us both down like lead. And with every passing second, the waterlogged uniform dragged me toward the bottom of the pool. My lungs burned for oxygen, my calf muscles began to cramp violently, and for a terrifying moment, I truly believed that the dark water was going to swallow us both alive before anyone on land moved a finger. "Help us, damn it! Somebody help!" I shrieked one last time toward the patio, my voice breaking with pure desperation as my energy rapidly drained away. Just as my head slipped beneath the rippling surface, a heavy splash echoed across the garden as Bradley finally found a thread of conscience and dived in, helping me drag Ethan's limp body to the shallow steps where Arthur reluctantly grabbed his arms and hauled him onto the dry stone floor. Ethan collapsed onto his side on the smooth stone, coughing violently and throwing up mouthfuls of swallowed pool water, his chest heaving up and down in ragged, desperate gasp for air, while his white linen shirt clung to his pale, shivering frame. I dragged myself out of the pool with great difficulty, trembling uncontrollably from a mixture of shock, exhaustion, and the chill of the morning breeze. The cheap dollar store makeup I had applied that morning was completely washed down my neck. My dark hair was plastered against my face, and a puddle of chlorinated water was pooling rapidly around my soaked shoes as I dropped to my knees beside him. "Are you all right, Mr. Vance? Can you hear me?" I asked between heavy, ragged breaths, my hands hovering nervously over his soaked shoulders. Ethan did not answer immediately. He continued to cough and gasp, but his sharp hazel eyes slowly drifted upward and locked onto mine with an intensity that sent a shiver straight down my spine. A look compounded of profound shock, utter vulnerability, and something deeply buried that looked like raw humiliation. Clara, the housekeeper, suddenly rushed forward with a thick white bath towel, kneeling down and wrapping it around Ethan's shoulders with overly mechanical, frantic movements. "What on earth were you thinking, Ethan? You know very well you are never supposed to be near the pool area without proper supervision," she scolded him, in a tone that unnervingly mixed artificial concern with subtle irritation. "I am not a complete invalid," Ethan snapped back, his voice raspy and choked with water as he tried to push her hands away, his jaw clenching tightly as he looked at the overturned wheelchair in deep shame. He had clearly been trying to reach an antique gold watch that had slipped off his wrist and fallen into the shallow water, only for his momentum to carry him over the edge. Clara then spun around toward me, her eyes flashing with pure venom as she pointed a manicured finger directly at my face. "And you, Daisy, this was completely irresponsible. You are brand new here, you have no training, and you don't know the first thing about handling Mr. Vance's condition. You should have stood back and called for experienced help instead of causing a chaotic scene." "Experienced help?" I countered, wiping the stinging water from my eyes as anger surged through my exhaustion. "To do what, Clara? To stand around like marble statues and watch him drown right in front of your eyes? Were we supposed to wait until he stopped breathing before your precious experience decided to act?" Clara's face flushed a deep, ugly crimson, her lips trembling with fury at being called out by a 22-year-old girl from the mountains. "How dare you speak to me like that, you ungrateful little hillbilly? You haven't even been here 2 weeks, and you think you can run this household? You have no idea who you are dealing with." "That is enough." Ethan's voice boomed across the patio with a sudden razor-sharp authority that instantly silenced the entire garden. Everyone froze in place, stunned by the sheer power echoing from the pale, shivering young man sitting on the stone floor. Ethan swept his icy gaze across the faces of the staff, stopping on each person before looking at me. Every single one of you, Ethan said, his voice dropping to a deadly cold whisper. Except Daisy. Pack your things and get off my property immediately. You are all fired. A heavy, suffocating silence descended upon the grand courtyard, so quiet that you could hear the gentle rustle of the oak leaves in the autumn wind. Clara turned pale as a ghost, Bradley's jaw dropped open in utter disbelief, and Hannah clutched her apron to her chest, as if she had been struck by lightning. "Ethan, please, you can't be serious," Clara pleaded, her voice trembling as she took a desperate step forward. "I have managed this estate for 12 years. I served your father before he passed." "And what good were those 12 years when I was drowning 3 feet away from you?" Ethan interrupted coldly, his eyes showing zero mercy. "I watched all of you stand there and calculate whether saving my life was worth the effort. Only this girl, who barely knows my name and makes minimum wage, risked her life to jump into the deep end. Your checks will be wired to you by noon, but if I see any of your faces on my land in 1 hour, I will have the security team remove you for trespassing." One by one, the staff turned and walked away with their heads hung low, though Clara lingered just long enough to lean close to my ear as she passed, whispering through clenched teeth, "You think you won something today, little girl? You just inherited a living nightmare." By late afternoon, the massive 3-story brick mansion felt terrifyingly hollow and quiet, the absence of 5 full-time staff members turning the high-ceilinged halls into a silent cavern. The heavy oak doors had closed behind the old crew, leaving only the soft hum of the central air conditioner and the steady sound of my own footsteps echoing across the polished hardwood floors. I had changed into a dry set of spare clothes, a simple pair of jeans and a plain cotton t-shirt, and set about straightening up the chaotic mess left behind in the master living room. My mind was spinning at 100 miles an hour. I had moved to Atlanta to earn enough money to send back home to North Carolina to help cover my mother's rising medical bills for her chronic arthritis. And now, through a bizarre turn of fate, I was the sole person remaining in charge of a 20,000-square-foot estate owned by one of the wealthiest, most reclusive young men in the state. I carefully pushed Ethan's specialized wheelchair into his private study, finding him seated behind a massive mahogany desk, staring blankly out the floor-to-ceiling windows at the sun beginning to set over the rolling hills. "Your evening tea is ready, Mr. Vance," I said softly, placing a silver tray holding a steaming porcelain cup onto the edge of the desk, keeping a respectful distance as I had been instructed during my orientation. Ethan did not turn around immediately. He remained motionless, his silhouette framed by the golden-orange hues of the twilight. "I told you to call me Ethan," he said quietly, his voice lacking the sharp, bitter edge that usually defined his interactions with everyone in the house. "And you don't need to tiptoe around me like I am made of glass, Daisy. You proved earlier today that you aren't afraid of me." I paused, smoothing down the front of my jeans as I looked at the back of his chair. "I grew up in a small cabin with a father who had a temper hotter than a wood stove in January, Mr. Vance. A man yelling from a chair doesn't scare me much, but seeing a human being suffer alone in the dark, that scares me plenty." Ethan turned his chair slowly to face me, his hazel eyes searching my face with a deep, lingering curiosity, as if he were trying to translate a language he had never heard before. The days rolled into weeks, and the initial awkward silence between us slowly began to dissolve like morning mist over the Smoky Mountains. Without the oppressive presence of Clara and the rest of the cynical household staff, the atmosphere inside the grand house shifted subtly. I took over cooking simple, hearty Southern meals, cleaning the endless rooms, and managing his daily schedule, while Ethan slowly began to tolerate my constant presence. However, The true turning point came during his bi-weekly physical therapy session in late October. Dr. Harrison, a patient middle-aged therapist who had been visiting the estate for years, was trying to guide Ethan through a series of grueling leg lifts using elastic resistance bands in the home gym. Ethan's face was flushed red, thick beads of sweat dripping from his forehead as he grunted in frustration, his leg refusing to lift even an inch off the padded leather table. "I can't do it, Doc. It's useless," Ethan growled out, slamming his fists against the mat and throwing his head back in defeat. "My nervous system is shot. You know as well as I do that the spinal trauma is permanent." "You aren't failing because of your spine today, Ethan," I spoke up unexpectedly from the doorway where I was folding clean white gym towels. Both Dr. Harrison and Ethan froze, looking over at me in complete surprise. Dr. Harrison looked slightly uncomfortable, adjusting his glasses, while Ethan's eyes narrowed into dangerous slits. "Excuse me," Ethan spat out, his voice dropping into that familiar defensive chill he used as armor. "What on earth do you know about spinal cord injuries, Daisy? Did you get a medical degree while sweeping the hallway?" "I don't need a medical degree to recognize when a man is quitting before he even starts," I replied calmly, setting the folded towels on a wooden bench and walking right up to the edge of the mat, holding his sharp gaze without flinching. "Your legs might be damaged, but it's your mind that is completely paralyzed. You are so terrified of trying your best and failing that you would rather pretend you can't move at all. You are hiding behind that chair because it's safer to be angry at the world than to risk being disappointed again." Dr. Harrison cleared his throat awkwardly, nervously tapping his clipboard. "Perhaps I should step outside for a brief moment to check on my equipment in the van," the doctor murmured, sensing the volatile electricity charging the room, and he quickly exited before Ethan could utter a word of protest. Once the heavy double doors clicked shut, Ethan glared at me with an intensity that could have burned a hole through solid steel. "You have a remarkably big mouth for someone whose job description involves dusting baseboards," he said through gritted teeth, his jaw muscles working frantically. "You can fire me right now if you want," I said, leaning against the wooden wall and folding my arms across my chest. "I will pack my single canvas bag and catch the next Greyhound bus back to Bryson City. But deep down, you know I am telling you the absolute truth. You saved yourself from the world by shutting everyone out, but now you are just drowning in a different kind of deep water." Ethan opened his mouth to deliver a furious rebuttal, but the words seemed to die in his throat. His posture slowly deflated, the fierce anger in his eyes gradually giving way to a profound, agonizing sorrow that he had kept locked away in the dark for 5 long years. "She used to say things like that," Ethan whispered softly, after a long, heavy silence, his voice barely audible over the hum of the air vents as he looked down at his motionless lap. "Who used to?" I asked gently, taking a slow step closer and sitting down on the edge of a nearby workout bench. Ethan ran a trembling hand through his dark hair, looking out the gym window toward the vacant gardens. "My mother," he said, the word sounding heavy and foreign on his tongue. "Evelyn. She was the only person in my life who never let me get away with feeling sorry for myself. But she left. She abandoned me right after the car accident 5 years ago, when I needed her more than breathing itself." A quiet sadness hung in the room as Ethan shared that tiny piece of his past, a piece of puzzle I had never heard mentioned in any of the household records or legal documents I had occasionally come across while organizing his study. The following morning, while performing my routine dusting in Ethan's sprawling private office, I noticed something unusual about the massive Victorian walnut desk that sat in the center of the room. I was wiping down the intricate brass drawer handles when I noticed that the bottom right drawer did not slide as deep as the left one, despite appearing identical from the outside. Driven by a sudden stroke of curiosity, I pulled the heavy wooden drawer all the way out and peered inside with a small flashlight. Hidden behind a false wooden backing at the very rear of the cabinet was a thick, dusty bundle tied tightly with a faded ribbon. My heart hammered against my ribs as I reached in and pulled the bundle into the light. It was a stack of at least 50 yellowed envelopes, all bearing the same delicate, elegant handwriting, all addressed to Mr. Ethan Vance at this exact street address. Every single letter bore a postmark from the past 5 years, and every single envelope remained completely unopened, their wax seals intact. I carefully picked up the top letter, dated just 3 months prior, and read the return address stamped in purple ink. Evelyn Vance, Oak Haven Senior Care Facility, Asheville, North Carolina. Before I could digest the incredible discovery, the distinct electronic hum of Ethan's motorized wheelchair echoed down the hardwood hallway outside the office door. Panic surged through me as I frantically tried to slide the hidden drawer back into place, but the wooden alignment was off, and the drawer jammed halfway. The heavy office door swung open, and Ethan rolled into the room, his eyes instantly catching my panicked expression and the thick stack of yellowed letters sitting openly on the top of his pristine blotter. "What on earth are you doing, Daisy?" he asked, his voice instantly tightening with suspicion as he rolled his chair closer to the desk. I was dusting the interior drawers, and I found a false compartment," I stammered, my cheeks burning with guilt, though I refused to hide the letters behind my back. "Ethan, these are letters. Dozens of them. They are all from your mother." The atmosphere in the sunlit office transformed in a single second, from peaceful quiet to an icy, suffocating storm. Ethan's face turned deathly pale, his hazel eyes locking onto the dusty stack of envelopes with a combination of utter shock and sudden, explosive rage. The knuckles of his hands turned stark white as he gripped the armrests of his wheelchair so hard the leather groaned under the pressure. "Where did you get those?" he demanded, his voice dropping an octave into a guttural, dangerous whisper that vibrated through the room. "They were hidden in a secret compartment behind the lower desk drawer," I explained hastily, taking a step back to give him space as I pointed to the dislodged piece of wood. "Ethan, there are over 50 letters here. The earliest ones are dated just 2 weeks after your car accident 5 years ago, and the most recent one arrived only 3 months back. She never abandoned you. She has been writing to you every single month." "That is impossible," Ethan roared, slamming his open palm against the heavy desktop with a force that made the silver desk lamp rattle violently. "She left the hospital in Atlanta while I was still in an induced coma. She packed her clothes, emptied her personal bank account, and vanished without leaving a single note or phone number. Gregory told me himself that she wanted nothing to do with a crippled son." The name Gregory struck a cold chord in my chest. Gregory was the former head butler who had managed the Vance estate for over 20 years, the man who had hired Clara and the rest of the unfaithful staff before suddenly taking a lavish retirement package and moving away just 2 days before I was brought on board. "Gregory lied to you, Ethan," I said with fierce conviction, picking up 3 random envelopes from different years and placing them directly in front of him on the blotter. "Look at the postmarks. Look at the stamps. These were mailed from Asheville, North Carolina, month after month, year after year. Someone in this house was intercepting her mail, hiding her letters, and feeding you poison so you would believe you were completely alone in the world." Ethan stared at the elegant, familiar handwriting on the envelopes, his chest heaving as if he had just run a marathon, his trembling hands hovering over the paper as if he were terrified the ink might burn his skin. With agonizing slowness, he slid his index finger under the seal of the oldest letter, dated 5 years ago, and pulled out a single sheet of cream-colored stationery. His eyes scanned the lines, and I watched as a tear escaped his eye and rolled down his pale cheek. "My dearest Ethan," he read aloud, his voice breaking uncontrollably on every word. "They won't let me see you in the intensive care unit. Gregory told me that your father's estate lawyers have issued a restraining order against me, claiming that my presence causes you dangerous stress. He said you blamed me for the crash, that you hated the very sight of me. I am leaving for the mountains because they threatened to cut off the funding for your medical rehabilitation if I stayed. But I will never stop loving you, my brave boy. I will write to you every month until my heart stops beating." Ethan dropped the paper as if it were a physical weight crushing his chest, a harsh, choked sob escaping his throat as the cruel reality of the past 5 years crashed down upon his shoulders. The man who had isolated himself from the entire world, believing his own mother had discarded him like trash, realized in an instant that his entire life of bitter solitude had been a meticulously manufactured lie orchestrated by a greedy butler who wanted total control over the family fortune. "Call Gregory!" Ethan spat out, his tear-streaked face twisting into a mask of pure, unadulterated fury as he pointed frantically toward the office landline phone. "Find his number in the estate registry and put him on speakerphone right now." My hands shook as I flipped through the leather-bound household directory, dialing the 10-digit number listed for Gregory's post-retirement home in Florida. The phone rang 4 long, agonizing times before a smooth, pretentious voice answered on the line. "Hello? This is the residence of Gregory Vance Montgomery. Who is speaking?" "It's Ethan," Ethan said, his voice terrifyingly calm, like the eye of a hurricane. There was a sudden, sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line, followed by a long, heavy pause. "Ah, Master Ethan," Gregory said, attempting to regain his suave, polished tone. "What a surprising pleasure. How are things at the estate? I trust Clara is maintaining the standards I established." "I fired Clara and the entire staff 3 weeks ago, Gregory," Ethan said coldly, leaning toward the speakerphone. "And 10 minutes ago, my new assistant found the false compartment in my father's walnut desk. I am holding 54 unopened letters from my mother, Gregory. 54. A suffocating silence stretched across the phone line for several seconds, so quiet we could hear the faint murmur of ocean waves in the background of Gregory's Florida home. When Gregory finally spoke again, all the polite, dignified professionalism had completely vanished from his voice, replaced by a cold, calculating tone. "You always were too sentimental for your own good, Ethan," Gregory said smoothly, without a shred of remorse or shame. "Your father left me in charge of the family trust's administration. Do you have any idea how chaotic your mother was? She was weak, emotional, and she would have squandered half the estate on foolish charities and useless medical treatments in Europe. I did what was necessary to preserve the Vance legacy and keep the estate's finances under my firm direction. You were a bitter, broken boy in a chair. Keeping you isolated made running the family assets remarkably efficient." "You monstrous parasite," Ethan whispered, his knuckles turning blue as he gripped the edge of the desk. "You stole 5 years of my life with my mother. You let me rot in this house, believing I was totally unloved." "Oh, spare me the dramatic poetry, Ethan," Gregory scoffed coldly over the speaker. "You had your millions, your luxury mansion, and your private doctors. What did it matter if a few silly letters went unread? You wouldn't have listened to her anyway back then. You were too full of rage. I am turning every single one of these letters over to the federal authorities tomorrow morning, Gregory, Ethan declared, his voice trembling with a powerful, righteous anger. Interception of mail is a federal crime, and fraud regarding estate administration will put you in a state penitentiary for the rest of your natural life. Enjoy your beach house while you still have it, because I am coming for everything you took from me. Ethan slammed his hand down on the hang-up button, severing the connection, and dropped his head into his hands, his body shaking with deep, silent sobs. I stood beside his chair in silence for a long time, allowing him to let out the 5 years of pent-up grief and betrayal that had been poisoning his soul. When his breathing finally slowed, and he wiped his eyes with the back of his sleeve, I walked over to the desk, pulled out a fresh piece of paper, and began writing down a route map. "What are you doing, Daisy?" Ethan asked quietly, his hazel eyes red-rimmed and exhausted as he looked up at me. "I am checking the highway distances from Atlanta to Asheville, North Carolina," I said firmly, looking him dead in the eye. "It is a 3.5-hour drive through the mountains. We are going to pack a suitcase, put your adaptive van in drive, and we are going to get your mother back." Ethan stared at me in disbelief, shaking his head gently. "Daisy, look at me. I haven't left this estate in over 3 years. I haven't traveled across state lines since the accident. What if she doesn't recognize me? What if she has moved on? What if it's too late?" "It is never too late as long as there is breath in your body, Ethan Vance," I said, leaning over the desk and placing my hand gently over his trembling fingers. "You risked your life trying to reach a watch in a pool because you were tired of living in fear. Now it's time to stop living in fear of the truth. We are leaving at 6 o'clock tomorrow morning." The crisp November mountain air brushed against my face as I steered Ethan's silver custom conversion van up the winding, tree-lined roads of western North Carolina. The autumn leaves were a vibrant tapestry of crimson, gold, and deep orange, covering the rolling peaks of the Blue Ridge Mountains in a breathtaking display of natural beauty. In the passenger seat beside me, Ethan sat in complete silence, his hands tightly clasped in his lap, staring out the window at the passing scenery with a mixture of awe and profound nervousness. He had spent the last 3 years trapped behind the high iron gates of his Atlanta estate, forgetting how vast and beautiful the world outside truly was. "We are only 10 minutes away from the Oak Haven facility, Ethan," I said softly, breaking the quiet cabin air while keeping my eyes on the highway. "How are you feeling?" "Like my heart is about to burst right out of my ribs, Daisy," he admitted candidly, turning to look at me with a faint nervous smile. 5 years is a terrifyingly long time. What if she is angry at me for never replying?" "She wrote you 54 letters, Ethan," I reminded him gently. "A mother who writes for 5 years straight without receiving a single reply isn't writing out of obligation. She is writing out of an unconditional love that time and distance can never erase." We turned off the main highway onto a peaceful, gravel driveway lined with towering pine trees, leading up to a charming, rustic brick building surrounded by vibrant flower gardens and wide wooden porches equipped with rocking chairs. Oak Haven Senior Care Facility looked less like a medical institution and more like a cozy mountain lodge, where elderly residents sat outdoors enjoying the cool mountain breeze. I parked the van near the front entrance, deployed the automated wheelchair ramp, and helped Ethan guide his chair onto the smooth concrete path. My heart pounded in my own chest as we walked through the double-glass doors into the warm, carpeted lobby, where the gentle scent of lavender and freshly baked apple pie filled the air. A friendly, middle-aged receptionist with graying hair, looked up from her computer screen and smiled warmly at us. "Good morning. Welcome to Oak Haven. How can I help you folks today?" "Good morning," I said, taking a small step forward while Ethan sat beside me, his throat seemingly too dry to produce sound. "We are here to see Evelyn Vance. Is she available for visitors this morning?" The receptionist's eyes lit up with immediate recognition, and a broad, genuine smile spread across her face. "Evelyn? Oh, absolutely. She is currently sitting out on the back garden patio, enjoying her morning tea under the oak tree. Are you family?" Ethan took a deep, shuddering breath, clearing his throat as he forced himself to speak. I am her son, Ethan." The receptionist gasped softly, her hands flying to her mouth as her eyes welled up with unexpected emotion. "Ethan? Oh, dear merciful Lord. She talks about you every single day of her life. She has a framed photograph of you on her bedside table that she kisses every night before she goes to sleep. Please, go right through those double doors at the end of the hall. She is waiting for you." See, I pushed Ethan's wheelchair down the quiet, carpeted hallway, the sound of our footsteps echoing softly against the wood-paneled walls. As we reached the glass doors leading to the back patio, my hands began to sweat on the rubber grips of his chair. Out on the sunlit terrace, sitting alone at a wrought iron table beneath the golden canopy of a massive oak tree, was an elegant woman in her late 50s with silver-streaked dark hair, wearing a soft lavender cardigan. She held a delicate porcelain teacup in her frail hands, looking out over the misty mountain valley with a quiet, solemn expression. Despite the wrinkles around her eyes and the pale fragility of her frame, her resemblance to Ethan was striking. She possessed the exact same high cheekbones and deep hazel eyes. "Go on," I whispered softly in Ethan's ear, stepping back and letting go of his wheelchair handles. "This is your moment." Ethan nodded slowly, his fingers trembling as he engaged the hand controls of his motorized chair, rolling smoothly over the stone threshold and onto the brick patio. The soft whir of the electric motor made the silver-haired woman turn her head slowly toward the sound. For a second that felt as long as an eternity, time seemed to stand completely still on that mountain terrace. Evelyn dropped her teacup onto the saucer with a sharp clatter, her hazel eyes widening in absolute, breathless shock as she stared at the young man rolling toward her. She rubbed her eyes frantically with her wrinkled hands, as if believing her mind was playing a cruel trick on her in her old age. "Ethan," she whispered, her voice barely a breath against the cool mountain wind, trembling with an impossible mix of hope and terror. "Hello, Mom," Ethan said, stopping his chair 5 feet away from her table, his voice cracking as tears spilled over his eyelashes and ran freely down his face. Evelyn stood up from her chair with a speed that defied her fragile body, knocking her cloth napkin to the floor as she took 2 unsteady steps toward him, her hands hovering in the air as if she were terrified he might dissolve into thin air if she touched him. "My boy, my sweet, beautiful boy," she sobbed, sinking to her knees right on the brick patio floor in front of his wheelchair, wrapping her slender arms tightly around his waist and burying her face into his chest. Ethan leaned forward, wrapping his broad arms around his mother's shaking shoulders, pulling her as close to his heart as humanly possible while weeping openly without a single shred of restraint. I stood near the glass doors, watching the emotional reunion through a veil of my own tears, feeling like a quiet witness to a holy miracle. The 5 long years of bitter darkness, manufactured hatred, and heartbreaking loneliness vanished from that patio like mist under the morning sun, replaced by the raw, healing warmth of a mother and son holding each other once again. I never stopped writing to you, Ethan, Evelyn cried, lifting her face to cup his cheeks with her trembling palms, searching his features with starved affection. I wrote you every single month. I begged them to let me see you. I know, Mom. I know now, Ethan choked out, kissing her forehead over and over again. A brave girl named Daisy found all 54 of your letters hidden in a desk drawer yesterday. I never received a single one until now. I never stopped loving you, Mom. I am so sorry for believing the lies. Evelyn turned her head slightly to look over Ethan's shoulder, her tear-filled hazel eyes locking onto mine as I stood by the door. She offered me a smile so radiant, so overflowing with profound gratitude, that it warmed me to the very core of my soul. In that beautiful, quiet moment under the autumn oak tree, I realized that saving a man from drowning in a swimming pool was only the tiny beginning of a much greater story. The real rescue was bringing two lost souls back from the freezing abyss of heartbreak and restoring a broken family to the light. The 3 weeks following our journey to Asheville passed in a whirlwind of incredible, transformative change at the Vance estate in Atlanta. Ethan worked tirelessly with his legal team to freeze Gregory's access to the family trusts, filing formal criminal charges for mail fraud and grand larceny that quickly resulted in the former butler's arrest at his Florida home. But more importantly, Ethan initiated the immediate transfer of his mother from the care facility in North Carolina back to her rightful home at the estate. We spent several days renovating the spacious ground-floor guest suite, filling it with vibrant, fresh flowers, plush velvet furniture, and family photographs that had been hidden away in attic trunks for half a decade. When Evelyn finally walked through the grand front doors of the mansion on a chilly afternoon in mid-November, supported by a polished mahogany cane, the massive house no longer felt like a cold, hollow museum of grief. It felt, for the very first time, like a true home filled with warmth, laughter, and hope. Every afternoon, the melody of classical piano music echoed through the high-ceilinged halls as Evelyn sat at the restored grand piano in the living room, her slender fingers dancing over the keys while Ethan sat beside her in his chair, listening with a peaceful smile that I had never seen on his face before. His physical therapy sessions with Dr. Harrison had transformed completely as well. Driven by a powerful new desire to stand tall in front of his mother, Ethan pushed himself through grueling leg exercises with a fierce, unyielding determination that amazed everyone. One late afternoon in late November, while Dr. Harrison stood close by with a spotter belt, Ethan gripped the stainless steel parallel bars in the home gym, gritted his teeth, and slowly, agonizingly forced his legs to straighten, standing completely upright on his own 2 feet for over 2 full minutes, while his mother wept tears of joy from the doorway. "Look at me, Mom," Ethan called out, his voice shaking with intense pride and exhaustion, sweat pouring down his face as his trembling legs held his weight. "I'm standing. I'm really standing." "You are doing brilliant, my brave boy," Evelyn choked out, pressing her handkerchief to her eyes while I clapped my hands until my palms turned red. Later that evening, after Evelyn had retired to her suite for an early night's rest, I found Ethan sitting in his wheelchair in the glass conservatory, looking out at the moonlit gardens while holding a steaming cup of chamomile tea. I walked in softly, setting a freshly laundered throw blanket over his lap. "You should be very proud of yourself tonight, Ethan," I said gently, sitting down on the wicker bench beside his chair. "Dr. Harrison says that if you keep up this level of progress, you will be walking with a simple mobility cane by next summer." Ethan looked at me in the dim moonlight, his hazel eyes soft and full of deep emotion. I couldn't have stood up for 2 seconds if you hadn't shoved me out of my comfort zone, Daisy, he said quietly, reaching out and taking my hand in his grip warm and solid. You gave me back my mother. You gave me back my self-respect. And you gave me back a future worth living for. I can never repay you for what you've done for this family. You don't owe me anything, Ethan. I smiled, feeling a sudden, tender warmth bloom in my chest as his fingers intertwined with mine. Seeing you happy and whole is more than enough payment for me. I hesitated for a brief second, biting my lower lip as I pulled a thick white envelope out of my apron pocket and placed it gently on his lap. Ethan looked down at the envelope, noticing the official purple seal of the Georgia State University School of Nursing in Savannah. "What is this?" Ethan asked, his brow furrowing as he picked up the letter and looked up at me with a guarded, uncertain expression. "Before I moved to Atlanta 2 months ago," I explained softly, keeping my voice steady despite the nervous knot in my stomach. "I applied for a specialized 4-year nursing scholarship program down in Savannah. I received this acceptance letter in the mail this morning. They are offering me a full tuition scholarship starting in early January." A long, heavy silence fell over the moonlit conservatory, the sound of our breathing filling the quiet space between us. Ethan stared at the official document for a long moment, his thumb tracing the embossed seal on the paper, his face unreadable in the shadows. When he finally looked up at me, I caught a sudden flash of deep, agonizing sorrow in his eyes, though he quickly masked it with a proud, supportive smile. "This is an incredible achievement, Daisy," Ethan said, his voice dropping an octave as he fought to keep it from trembling. "You are going to make an extraordinary nurse. You have more heart, courage, and natural compassion than anyone I have ever met in my entire life." "I haven't decided if I'm going to accept it yet," I admitted, looking down at my hands in my lap. "Ethan, your mother still needs daily assistance, and your rehabilitation is at a critical stage. I can't just pack up my bags and abandon both of you after everything we've built together over these past months. I feel like my place is here, protecting this family." "No, Daisy. Absolutely not," Ethan said firmly, leaning forward in his chair and taking both of my hands into his, squeezing them tightly. "You are 22 years old, and you have spent your entire life putting everyone else's needs above your own. Your mother's health in North Carolina, your family's financial struggles, and now my estate. I will not allow you to put your bright future on hold to become a permanent caregiver in this house." "But who is going to take care of you?" I asked, a tear slipping down my cheek as the thought of leaving the estate filled me with a sudden, painful ache I hadn't anticipated. Ethan smiled warmly, using his thumb to gently wipe the tear from my face. "Evelyn and I are strong now, Daisy. We will hire a professional, certified nursing team to assist us. And Dr. Harrison is with me every day. You came to the big city looking for a life, for an education, for a real future. You saved my life from that pool, but if I let you sacrifice your dreams for my comfort, I would be dragging you under the water with me." He took a deep breath, looking deep into my eyes with an intensity that made my heart leap against my ribs. "Go to Savannah, Daisy. Become the amazing nurse you were born to be. Get your degree, build your career, and live your life with zero regrets." "And what about us?" I whispered, the words escaping my lips before I could filter them, revealing the deep affection that had grown between us over the long, intimate months spent side by side in the quiet estate. Ethan pulled my hands closer to his chest, placing them directly over his beating heart. "Savannah is only a 4-hour drive from Atlanta," he said softly, a tender, loving smile gracing his features. "And this house will always be your home, Daisy." The guest suite is yours whenever you want to visit on holidays, and my mother will be playing the piano waiting for your return. Go earn your degree, and when you graduate in 4 years, come back home to me. Come back to a man who will be standing on his own 2 feet at the front door waiting for you. On a crisp, sunny morning in early January, the silver conversion van sat idling near the front brick steps of the Grand Vance estate, its trunk packed with my canvas bags and new nursing textbooks. The autumn leaves had all fallen, giving way to a quiet, peaceful winter morning where the morning frost sparkled like diamonds on the manicured lawn. Evelyn stood on the porch, wrapped in a warm wool coat, holding her mahogany cane in one hand while wiping tears of affection from her eyes with a silk handkerchief. She stepped forward, pulling me into a long, motherly embrace that filled my heart with a profound sense of warmth and belonging. "You brought my son back to me, Daisy," Evelyn whispered softly against my hair, kissing my cheek with deep tenderness. "You will forever be a daughter in my heart. Study hard, my dear girl, and remember that our doors and our hearts are wide open for you always." "Thank you for everything, Evelyn," I murmured, holding her tightly before turning to face Ethan, who was sitting in his wheelchair at the top of the porch steps. As I walked up to him, my heart hammering against my chest, Ethan suddenly did something that took my breath away. He unlocked his chair's footrests, grabbed his sleek wooden mobility cane resting against the armrest, and with a slow, powerful push of his arms and legs, he forced himself up out of the seat. He stood fully upright on his own 2 feet on the top step, balancing himself securely on the cane, looking down at me with towering strength and a radiant, triumphant smile. My hands flew to my mouth in overwhelming joy as I looked up at the man who had once been trapped in dark despair, now standing tall under the winter sky like a mighty mountain oak. "I promised you I would stand up to say goodbye," Ethan said, his voice filled with a deep, emotional resonance as he reached out his free arm and pulled me into a close, powerful embrace against his solid chest. I wrapped my arms around his waist, resting my head against his shoulder, breathing in the scent of cedar wood and fresh soap that had become my ultimate comfort over these past months. "I will be back for summer break in June," I promised into his collarbone, holding him tightly as if to imprint the feeling of his embrace into my memory forever. "I will count down every single day until June," Ethan replied softly, leaning down to press a warm, gentle kiss against my temple, his breath sweet against my skin. "Work hard, Daisy Miller. Your future is waiting for you." I pulled away slowly, my eyes lingering on his strong, handsome face one last time before walking down the brick steps and sliding into the driver's seat of my small sedan. As I turned the ignition and put the car into drive, I looked into the rearview mirror as I drove down the long, winding driveway. Framed by the grand stone arches of the estate, Ethan stood tall on the porch beside his mother, waving his hand high in the cold morning air. Two whole, healed human beings standing together in the light of a brand new day. A girl from the small mountain hollows of North Carolina had arrived in the big city looking for a simple job to pay the bills, only to discover that the greatest riches in this life are found not in bank accounts or grand estates, but in the miraculous power of love, second chances, and the courage to jump into the deep end when someone is calling for help. When we look back upon the long, winding tapestry of our human journey, we so often realize that the most profound transformations in our lives rarely arrive with the grand blare of trumpets or the dramatic turn of obvious fortune. More often than not, redemption comes knocking on our door in the quietest, most unexpected disguises. A sudden splash of cold water in a forgotten swimming pool, an unopened envelope tucked away in a dusty drawer, or the brave, unhesitating hand of a stranger extended toward us when the rest of the world has turned its back. We live in a world that is so quick to judge people by their current brokenness, by the physical chairs they sit in, or by the bitter walls they build around their wounded hearts to protect themselves from further pain. Yet, as the story of Ethan and Evelyn teaches us, no human soul is ever truly lost. No relationship is ever beyond the reach of healing, and no darkness is so absolute that it cannot be shattered by a single courageous act of unconditional love and truth. For those of us who have walked through the long, lonely valleys of middle age and beyond, who have carried the heavy burdens of family misunderstandings, unsaid words, and the haunting regret of lost years, this journey serves as a gentle, powerful reminder that it is never too late to open the hidden drawers of our past. True family is not merely defined by the blood that flows through our veins or the shared name on a legal deed. True family is built day by day, choice by choice, through the quiet acts of loyalty, forgiveness, and the willingness to stand beside one another when the storms of life threaten to carry us away. When we find the courage to confront the lies that have kept us isolated, to tear down the artificial walls of bitterness, and to forgive those who have stumbled along the way, we unlock a boundless capacity for grace that can restore even the most shattered lives to brilliant wholeness. May we all possess the brave, unhesitating heart of Daisy to jump into the deep end for those who are struggling to stay afloat. And may we all find the humility and hope of Ethan to let love pull us out of the dark and back into the glorious, healing light of a brand new day.